name's Fritz Byam. I'm the OT leader here at ITS Partners in Michigan. And today, really what you're going to get is a look inside a discussion that happens often amongst your panelists around what's going on in OT and OT pilots. And I really think we've really got a good lineup for you. A couple housekeeping things. We really want to know really what you're interested in instead of just kind of showing up and talking about the things that interest us or we see. So putting questions into the chat would really be appreciated and really keep this a lot more authentic than the discussion we're having here too. We're also having a raffle after this. So I think Melissa's putting a lot of the stuff into the chat about that. So I think it's a good time to kick it off, and I'd really like to talk about have the panel. I'd like to understand really who they are and what they've done, because this is really a pretty great panel with a lot of experience. And the first person I'd like you to meet, if you haven't met him already, is Robbie Rash. He's the ServiceNow outbound product manager, and Robbie's probably seen more OT pilots and projects starting than anybody in the country. Robbie, you want to introduce yourself a minute?
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Good afternoon, folks. As Fritz mentioned, I'm an outbound PM for what we could call the Operational Technology Management Solutions here at ServiceNow. And he's not far from incorrect. I think every POC or POV that we've executed here at ServiceNow for OT here in North America, I've been involved with in some shape or form. So I've got horrid stories to tell, all good, bad, or indifferent. No, but a lot of good lessons learned. But appreciate everyone's time, and thanks again for having me, Fritz.
Yeah. Okay, next we have Jay Weigart. Jay's the VP of Product at ITS, and Jay's particular magic in this discussion is he's been working on discovery and graph connectors for
at least like the last couple of years. My team, for the last 5 years has been focused solely on ServiceNow application development. Much of it, over the last 2 years has been OT centric. We've done something like 16 to 20 or so of the OT certified service graph connectors and vulnerability response integrations. So seen a lot of the data, and then we also kind of support those, which has been really cool, getting to see sort of how that data lands in the platform, how customers are using it, some of the challenges that they've run into. It's been a cool little ride for sure.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jay. And then we have Matt Smith. He's a principal architect here at ITS, and he's got a really interesting perspective because he's knee deep in several pilots.
That's right. Yep. Been able to get boots on the ground and talk to folks and see what the real challenges are out there in OT, and enabling some really cool outcomes within the ServiceNow platform for that end. So thanks for having me.
Great. And then, like I said, I'm Fritz, and I'm really fortunate. I kind of get to sit at the center and facilitate a lot of these conversations around OT, and in some ways get to be a little bit of collective intelligence around what's going on in the marketplace and that sort of thing. So real world experience from the team. Let's talk about the context about our discussion today, team. So we kind of have 6 building blocks for OT that we talk about, and there's no way we're going to get to all those today. But let me just run through it. One, there's alignment, and we'll talk a lot about alignment. That's one that's in and how important that is. Another one is the roadmap, and that really is how you transition from thinking about the project to going through your pilot to doing a full rollout. We're gonna hit that, but we're gonna set that aside a little bit. Data planning is one. Well, we got Jay here. We got to talk about data planning. That's going to happen. And then, as advertised, again, we have the expertise to really talk about the pilot or MVP design. And we'll talk a little bit about operationalizing OT, and then certainly measuring success factors is always kind of underpinning the whole thing. But again, we're going to focus today on alignment, data planning, and then kind of our point of view on a pilot or MVP or our learnings. So we got some choices. Where should we start? So for me, I think it's most fun. Let's just jump right into the pilot. Does that make sense?
That's what everyone wants to do, but I advise against that. I think alignment is the better place to start.
Okay.
Yes.
So the key components are alignment, are kind of the who, the why, the value outcomes, maybe the governance, like rewriting that success story. Why are you so passionate about starting with alignment?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Because everyone wants to skip by it, right? We have a budget, we want to spend it, and we got to get something built.
Yeah.
But
Same old story.
same old story, but this is really, really important. We are breaking into new space here. We're breaking into sites, facilities, a group of people who are not always in the know, like we have been for years. We've been talking process, we've been talking IT, but with OT, we really need to identify the who, what are we doing, why are we doing it, and again, talk about value-based outcomes. Right? What are you going to get out of this?
So I don't like to, I mean, I think you always need a mix of cautionary tales and overwhelming success stories to inspire people. But you do have some cautionary tales on this from your experience, right? You've seen some things kind of come to a grinding halt.
Unfortunately, yes, I've had a project with a client recently that, came to us largely from a non-OT perspective, from a security perspective, right? From a governance and a risk perspective, and we kick off a project and we didn't align in the organization and bring all the right people to the table, right? So we start the project, we start building based on those kinds of security and risk objectives, but the rest of the organization, the thought is let's wait until we get a little bit farther along and bring them to the conversation later, right? Show them what we've built, kind of sell them on that, but that slows progress down, right? That doesn't give us immediately the folks at the table with the time, for one, right? Every project needs time. If they don't have time to commit to this, even if they like the idea, then guess what? There we are, we're stopped until there is time and until there is resources. So
Yeah.
it's very, very important to get everybody.
And where did that misalignment show up in this case? Like how far down the road were you into the planning or piloting?
We were mid-development and getting to a point where, we're agile, we do a sprint review, you're ready to show something to your stakeholders. And that's when other stakeholders are brought to the table and you're meeting them for the first time, trying to catch them up to speed on what you're building and why. And again, what those outcomes are, which should have, kind of happened at some point.
So, and I think that's a thing we're seeing is these projects are starting in different areas. Some are IT, some start in OT, security, some bring in operations, and they're not all the same. But do you see this as being significantly different than a typical IT project?
At this alignment level, not that scope, right? This is, again, organizational alignment, objective alignment, getting the right resources. So it's a little bit of project management, but where it does get different is the value-based outcomes, right? We're building and designing something specific for a set of processes that are not IT.
Right.
Now, they might hook into the same platform and there might be dependencies and data dependencies, which we'll certainly touch on, but the objectives and the business outcomes are unique and they can change within the same organization depending on the site that you're working with and what is being produced by a site versus a different site. So.
And ultimately, the IT people have been looking at ServiceNow probably for a while, right? And some of the OT folks have maybe not really seen it, right? So kind of bringing them in after you've put something together is not going to take into account their unique requirements, et cetera. So
Hey, Robbie, you've seen a lot of these. Have you seen where someone's done a good job of alignment and like where they've really gotten a lot of traction and haven't gotten stuck because they've done some of these things?
I think Jay leaded into it a little bit there, what he just mentioned, right? One of the first projects I worked on when I came here to ServiceNow, we had a food manufacturer that came to us, right? And it's very atypical of an engagement that we have with OTM right now. It's because we have that relationship with the CISOs and the security folks. So it starts down that security path. But from a value perspective, right, this customer came to us and said, hey, we're security, we're probably going to end up writing you the check. However, right, we need to have that value outcome from our operational side of production and our maintenance folks, right? And so it was more of a forced alignment, in the lack of a better term, from that side of the organization to pull those folks into those conversations with OT and with the platform folks and with the CMDB managers and that sort of thing early on, because the ask was, we're funding this initiative within ServiceNow and OTM. However, right, we need to have value from the production and operation side of the house before we even agree to going any further, right? And so what it created, right, one was this alignment, which we typically don't see, and I love using the term alignment between IT and OT. We always talk about that convergence, Fritz, right? We always hear that one. But we seen that started that convergence because again, these are typically two groups of the organization that don't talk, right? So they were forced to have these conversations and start learning about what, ServiceNow was from that side of the, from the production side of the house. Typically those folks just aren't that versed with ServiceNow, but having the IT people start to learn a little bit more about OT and production and machines and PLCs and those sort of things where they've never had, never dipped their foot into that pool. And so it became one part of the story was really, again, that alignment story and thinking about how they're going to leverage that CMDB 12, 18, 24 months down the road, right? And some of the use cases, but was also leveraging, what we can do well with the ServiceNow to train those folks who's never touched it on what ServiceNow can do. And that inherently just created a ton of use cases where, they came back to us and said, well, if we can do this, I bet we can leverage it for this as well. And so they were bringing things back to us. Hey, we can playbook this fix or do this sort of thing. So it was a great first project, obviously for me, but it really leaned into how that alignment story between different organizations is so important, and it really framed how we start to do these workshops internally with customers. Right, the first exercise to it is pulling those folks together.
Yep. Great. Well, thanks, Robbie. Hey, last word on alignment, Matt. Your customer actually got back on track.
They did.
And there was a kind of a special way it happened. You want to share that with the whole group here?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's always a silver lining. Like I've mentioned, we brought some folks to the table a little late in the game, but the moment that we did, and this is why it's important to do it first, one of those groups of people became a champion. And that's exactly what we want, is the champions organization to promote the change. This group of individuals, while within the manufacturing and at a site, had already started thinking about service management and managing their service. So they're very familiar with the processes. They were familiar with the platform. They were all in. They were asking questions about how do we leverage knowledge and how do we do, like Robbie said, some of the other ideas start snowballing into the bigger picture of workflows and using the entire platform. So right away, we latched onto that champion and boom, you take off. So,
nice. Awesome. Yeah, and I think that's one of the key insights are it's the who and the why, and getting the what's in it for me and the stakeholders. And I think most organizations inherently know this. It's whether or not they decide to do it or not. So look, we've walked through a couple key points on alignment, the kind of the who and the why. We promised we're going to talk about the pilot. Jay, can we talk about the pilot now?
Yeah, I think we're going to get ahead of ourselves if we do that, right? Like, seriously, I want this to be successful.
Okay. So what do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about data, for sure.
Okay. So one of the reasons, and we'll get back to this,
sure,
that it's so important to have Jay here is literally his team has built, I don't know if the number 80% is perfectly accurate or not, but pretty darn close. Most of the ones that work, your team has built, right?
We've done a big chunk of it.
Yeah. Yep. And again, you support customers on this. So Jay is really an expert on because he supports customers every week that are trying to get data into the CMDB from these IDS tools. And, we have Robbie too, who's seen a lot of this. So I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but I think it's important that people know. My slide doesn't want to advance. I think it's about data planning. So Jay, what are your thoughts on data planning?
Lots.
Should we start with discovery for a minute?
Yeah. So obviously, I think anybody that's getting familiar with OT probably knows that traditional ServiceNow discovery is great, and the data center, right, is great at like Purdue levels, 3.5 and up. But you're not really going to be looking to do that in the production lines where you don't want to be actively kind of querying things that are producing, like ideally 24/7, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you have to have a really good reason to take down production, and probably just getting some information into the CMDB is not gonna check that box. So obviously, there are some different methods to do that. People will use manual CI creation, spreadsheet ingestions. Maybe the original OT CMDB was a spreadsheet. We've definitely seen that, right? And kind of importing that. But then, using a variety of kind of like IDS passive discovery tools, the network monitoring solutions has been a big part of kind of completing that puzzle. And then there obviously are going to be some challenges there, right, in terms of making sure that everything coalesces, right?
So can I ask a couple questions on discovery, and maybe even bring Robbie in for just a loop in here for a second, because he's seeing so many. Like, are we seeing that people are being successful with just one passive discovery tool, I guess is a question I throw out to you guys. And I know that's kind of a loaded question.
Find success.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, you did.
I mean, there's only, it's gonna depend on the deployment first, first of all, right? Like how deeply deployed is that solution, the sensors, et cetera, right? Like how aligned to network segmentation is it, things like that. But I think, especially if you're trying to get to kind of like a digital twin concept, right? There's just gonna be some stuff that's maybe not communicating over the network, period, right?
Right.
And in that case, you do need to get data out of SAP or Oracle or that spreadsheet that you've been maintaining for however many years, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, in order for it all to kind of flow into ServiceNow correctly, it needs to flow through the IRE, ideally, right? Because all the service graph connectors are going to be using ServiceNow's IRE, which really, I think, it really warrants, and where I see people kind of go wrong is not thinking about it architecturally, right? Service graph connectors can be kind of plug and play, right? And I think there's maybe a tendency for customers to plug one in, run it into sub-production, see, okay, yep, we've got some data. I can see some PLCs came through. And now, if you just roll that out without kind of looking at how that interacts with everything, maybe 6 months down the road, you're seeing you got duplicates in production, you've got, CIs getting merged, things that could have been caught in the sub-production environment had you done kind of the proper amount of data planning, right? When it's in production and you've got to untangle that, that's when it feels like everything's on fire,
Gotcha.
right? So doing the planning up front.
And Robbie, are you seeing that most people are using multiple discovery sources to populate the CMDB?
Oh, for sure. For sure. And in a perfect world, right? Every single facility would all have Siemens stuff, right? We just have one vendor and every single facility would have the same IDS tool and it'd be just an easy problem to solve, right? But that's just not reality, right? We have acquisitions, right? There's always the things being added, right? Sometimes these things are placed into the plant manager's realm of responsibility for some unknown reason, right? To manage these things and there's just, it's just not, it's just not reality, right? We would love to be able to do that, but Jay said it best, right? A lot of folks would leverage multiple sources in that IRE to take advantage of that, right? And I think this lays into the camp that I know ServiceNow really built IRE for, they thought they were building it for IT. Their real intention was for the OT folks to take advantage of it, because I think it's really where we can leverage it.
Absolutely.
Yes, and that's one of the things, I think this is a key, this multiple data sources. And look, the topic of this webinar is not why put ServiceNow at the center of your OT strategy. We have one for that and a great talk track on that. But this idea about several discovery sources, which will probably change over time, like I think in the next 3 or 4 years, discovery will look whole lot different than it does today. So I think that's a real compelling reason to make sure that data gets into the CMDB. And then Jay, just kind of to summarize a little bit, you help a lot of people through vendors. You have support with vendors. What are like the most common things you see where people are getting it wrong?
There's a couple things. I think again, not taking a look at like what data is coming through, your different discovery sources before you really roll it out, I think is probably one of the biggest ones, right? You've got to kind of really take a look at what attributes are you getting, what attributes are already there, and then how is the IRE going to play into that? Are you going to be good with just the base IRE rules, or are you going to need to customize it based on, something else, some other piece of process or some other data source to make sure that, the IRE isn't kind of misidentifying something as a CI that needs to be inserted that's already in the CI, right?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing, is wanting to make sure that you're not inserting CIs that are already there, or accidentally merging them together, right? Because maybe there's a shared MAC address or some kind of a shared attribute between them, right?
Okay, so that's great information on that. So the other thing that we've had a lot of discussions about internally, and we've seen it at some projects, like what's up with roles and access? Why is that why is that on the list today? Like why are we always talking about that?
Yeah, RBAC, role-based access control. It's a big component of pretty much every one of the projects I think that we've kind of seen, right? Customers needing to segment their data based on the site is kind of like the core of it, right? If somebody is working in plant A, they should ideally only be able to see plant A's data. And in some cases it's more than that, right? These are sensitive production processes. Maybe these are production processes involved in oil and gas or utilities, right? And maybe it needs to actually even be segmented from the rest of the ServiceNow kind of population, right? You don't want like end users, everybody on the platform to be able to see this because of the sensitivity of it, right? So, the RBAC or role-based access control piece is pretty important. It's one of the things where I think it gets very complex when you do kind of deviate and maybe go with like a custom model versus doing some of like the ServiceNow OTM, product type things, right?
Yeah.
Like using the actual OTM product as intended versus, what I think people end up with a lot of complexity and technical debt when they try to kind of wedge the OT stuff and the RBAC kind of story into maybe the existing IT data structure.
They
right?
create a big problem down the road.
It's a lot more to maintain.
Yeah, I wanted to actually jump in on that one for a minute because selfishly it goes back to alignment.
Yeah,
That's where I see it all starting.
Yeah.
But everything you said, just to sort of, put a pin in that, whether it's role-based access or we look at the RE kind of bottom up technically.
Yeah.
The top down is to kind of go back and say, look, guys, make sure that at this point in alignment, you're bringing in your configuration management team, your CMDB owners, your admins, your discovery admins, because the implications here might be obvious, and I'm overstating the obvious, but you're bringing in more scope. So as you bring in site A, B, C, and D, it's not just the people and their process, but it's what data is going to be captured in the CMDB and how's it going to affect your existing IT infrastructure.
Yeah, if they're common one is you've got some required attributes in the CMDB, right? And if they're not populated, the data is not going to get inserted, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't have the CMDB team in, right, then you're going to go, why is this field required?
Right.
It's blocking all my data from going through, right?
Yeah.
So again, it was alignment.
Okay, awesome. So look, you guys can read some of the key data planning attributes. Integrations are going to be a big part of it. The structure and architecture is going to matter. We'll talk about it, but there's an offering, a free offering, I think, in the store for a ITS Ready for Service Graph connector.
Yeah, it's a service graph readiness tool. Yeah,
Okay,
ITS Service Graph
I probably got
readiness
that
tool.
right.
It's all good. It's all good. But yeah, it reports on a lot of those kind of CMDB quirks, customized IRE rules, required attributes at the CMDB level, stuff like that.
Awesome. Hey, Robbie, you still out there?
I'm with you, man.
It's always hard to get into a word edgewise with this group. Hey, can we talk about the pilot now, please?
Yes, 100%. Please.
Finally. Okay. So as a team here, we talk about pilots a lot, and like none of this, I don't think anything is like a best practice, fully established. Customers are like, we get all that. We're very practical people, right? I think that's one thing you could say about this group. Robbie, what are your thoughts on what are people doing, first of all? Are they doing POVs? Are they really trying to sneak in phase one implementations? What do you think about that in depth versus breadth?
I wouldn't say they're trying to sneak in a POV, but I believe they should. And here's why, right? And you mentioned one of the top ones, right? Broad versus deep. Right. We're seeing a lot of customers, right? And again, I think it's due to just the way that we engage with folks out of the box. As we're talking to the CMDB manager, right? Typically, maybe somebody from security, right? So their main focus, and Jay mentioned it, right? I have a CMDB, I have stuff, I want to get my stuff into CMDB, right? That is their tunnel vision goal. No alignment, another plug for alignment, right? No thought process outside of that. Once I see my stuff, I can check that box off. I have my technical win and we're okay. Right. And, I can honestly say, based on our alignment conversations, right, we've seen it firsthand, that just gets you to the testing point, right? That just shows you, yes, that service graph connector works. It does what it's designed to do and it can pull things in, but it doesn't take you any further, right? And really and we kind of talked, the conversation has led up to this, right? You really need that alignment piece to figure out how much information am I going to need to the CMDB before that technical win you can check that box, because you might have to have another source of discovery. You might have to do another form of ingest. You're definitely going to have to do that alignment piece, right? So I think it really goes down to, we do POCs, but we really shouldn't be to that regard, right? We really should be thinking about, at least short term, what are your goals, right? What's your alignment with process, with engineering, with production, and those sort of folks? And what information do you need in there just to get some base level use cases out of the way and thought about up front, because that really defines that planning piece in terms of how much information you're going to need in that CMDB. Otherwise, 6 months from now, you're going to work back to step one. You're going to say, okay, let's rethink our discovery strategy and our RE strategy and figure out what information we need in our CMDB, and let's start the process over. So it really keeps us from having to do that quote unquote POC, engagement again.
Yeah, so I mean, I see that too. Sometimes people get like this number of sites they use as the objective, and I think that's wrong. I think there's an appropriate, we'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, it's a lot easier to do something shallow because when you actually start testing the workload and testing the process and getting people involved, all of a sudden that's the reality of what you're going to have to live with. And I think that's something that we really see is, I think if we encourage anything in a pilot, it's do something that's valuable that you can actually go scale horizontally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, if you don't have, I guess it all kind of comes back to the foundation. If you don't have a solid foundation, if you don't have something that's going to stand the test of time, and you're like, okay, yeah, this looks good, right?
Yeah.
Site one, you multiply that by 600 sites, 100 sites, right? And if you find something out 6 months, 12 months down the road that you don't like about that implementation, now you've got to fix that, across all of the sites, right? Rather than kind of just going deep with the first one and really putting it through its paces.
Another thing, outcomes is up here, and that's another thing that sometimes frustrates me when I hear people say, we're trying to get visibility or something like that, and not really defining it. I think that comes back to your thing about defining what does success really mean? Because, I mean, we talk about this all the time. Anybody can get the data into the CMDB once.
Right.
With maybe all the, have they defined what the required and critical metadata is for the data? Have they come back 30 or 90 days later to see is what they've done sustainable? And I kind of think in operations, if we roll out something that doesn't consider those factors, we're going to lose a lot of credibility. And I think that's going to cost us a lot of respect from our operational counterparts, and our organizations are going to miss out on a ton of value, which we'll talk about in a minute, in addition to just like some of the security benefits of having this data in the CMDB. So anybody have any thoughts on what the best way to determine the right number of sites to do a pilot or a POV is?
When you have enough data to prove the value of the outcome you're going for.
Insulting answer.
That was a good one.
But haven't you seen, like you've advocated, like I would always say one site, but being in the trenches, you said like some of the global customers have different different companies literally operating.
So again, I'm not going to harp on alignment, but I'll say outcomes since it's on this slide. It's asking a couple very pointed, good questions up front, so you know a little bit of landscape. Site A is a little bit different from site B. That way we can come to that question. How many sites just depends on the uniqueness of each site and how much of a baseline or a foundation, like you said, I want to build. And I 100% agree. I want to not be broad. I want to give you something that works, shows that outcome, grasp onto it, and then continue to take it and run with it. Right?
Yeah. It almost seems like the bare minimum. What's the bare minimum to get a good cross section, right? If you do have, different geos that have totally different requirements or whatever, right? Maybe one of each, something like that. But
So let's progress the discussion a little bit about like how do we use the pilot to get operational sponsorship? So sometimes talking about OT and selling OT, and I don't mean selling to customers, I mean selling it up the value chain, selling it to executives, feels a little bit like in selling insurance, right? It is like, and people buy insurance every day. It's very important, but it's a lot easier to sell something that you use every day. Mm-hmm. And that kind of speaks to operational benefits. And Robbie, what are you seeing about how we kind of translate what maybe this CISO or security or the board is driving into something that kind of aligns with an amazing operational vision that aligns with those priorities of safety, quality, worker experience, or productivity?
I hate to put the onus a lot on the platform managers, but it does become an exercise with those folks in terms of educating we'll say the OT side of the business, right? In terms of some of that functionality, because a lot of this is new to them, right? But, to kind of go back to our alignment thing, right? Part of that goes into that alignment piece out of the gate because they're learning this functionality. We get asked all the time, right? I know what I know about ServiceNow, but what I'm more curious about is I'm of what I don't know and how that can kind of play into our strategy, right? Because they already, a lot of these folks already have processes built. Now, it might be on a 3-ring binder on somebody's dusty desk that they never open up, but there's processes already built in place. But once we start educating them that we can digitize those things, right? We can start to, I want to say automate a lot of the things that make sense to be automated in that space. Their ears really perk up, right? And that's where they start to see the value, because what they're starting to see is, if I can take that, that week-long process of a change management control, right, and start to reduce that down to a couple of days, right? Now you're starting to think about downtime, right, and having those conversations and lost production and those sort of things, right? And that really gets the folks that write the checks, that gets their ears perked up. But it's that translation from, here's what we're doing well in security, right, and visibility, and we're building that foundation for you. Now, how can we leverage that foundation over on the process and production side of the house?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say, if we could just give our operations a list of the connected assets in a graphical form arranged by actually the operational structure, not by the subnet structure, something like that, like that'd be incredibly powerful for reducing, mean time to remediation for non-security incidents, right? And Jay, you've talked a little bit, you've always been big on the UX UI thing. Like, I think another important part of maybe the pilot, or maybe it's getting a little beyond that, is like the presentation layer to the people actually using the system.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of UX and kind of human-centered design, right? And I think that this kind of even goes back to just the alignment and the planning piece, right? Of making sure that you're doing sort of some of that persona mapping or journey mapping of like, okay, if you've got brand new customers, right, which the OT folks are going to be, right? What are your personas that you're dealing with? What are the use cases that they're trying to solve for? And like, are you putting something together that's going to be able to take them through that journey and have them leave them with a good experience, right? Leave them with the outcomes that hey, this was cool. This actually improved things, right? Like,
yeah. So we've actually got I'm fortunate enough, I'm involved in a project just because it's so interesting, kind of around that. And it's a building supply manufacturer, ServiceNow customer, that what they're doing is they have a great knowledge base, or they're starting a great knowledge base, and they're actually tying it to the connected and non-connected assets through ServiceNow, through the industrial process manager. And just think about the power of that on the factory floor. When you get those assets in the CMDB, you link your knowledge base to them. Now you have them, you have the ISO 95 model so you have line 1 filling, right? Mm-hmm. And you have the assets connected to it, and you have the knowledge base articles. And I think they'll even go so far as to have that sorted out on the HMIs, or human machine interfaces. So, line 1 filling area goes down, and, I'm the new operator. They have the same challenges. I'm guessing most operators do. They have turnover. They have a lot of people retiring. They go hit the knowledge base. It could just be for the line from the ISO 95 model would bring it up, and it'd bring it up. Or, I mean, as we move into the future and we do more things with AI, maybe, we can start recognizing the asset and the most common knowledge base article and that sort of thing. So we got a customer doing that today. And I think that's one of the coolest things I see going on. Insurance is important, especially with, just go look at the news, right, on OT. But if we can translate that to operational benefits, that whole idea of alignment, it gets a hell of a lot easier, right? All right. So complete job of defining your needed outcomes. I think if there's one thing that sitting down and figuring out, that's a big one. Focus on depth versus breadth. Really do something valuable and scalable in the process, right? And find the everyday benefit. And finally, this is a little plug. Talk to a team with practitioner experience. Matt was on a job and another customer called. They said it was refreshing. He knew what a PLC was. So really, really interesting stuff. And the bar is pretty low in this industry, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Let's see if I can advance my slide here. Okay, so one of the things we've done at ITS is we've really tried to come up with this idea of prescriptive OT implementation. It's a lie, a little bit. Nothing is absolutely prescriptive. but we're trying to boil it down to things people can understand and get on board with. And it's like aligning it to the ServiceNow modules, talking about the key outcomes and descriptions. We've gone so far as to start defining personas and starting to understand how they interact, writing workspaces that give that great user experience, designing vision at the executive level so people can get that sponsorship and create that value statement to make this more than an insurance investment. And we've actually got down to the point where we're starting to look at, okay, what are the very specific things that need to get done? And which ones could actually be part of a good MVP and kind of code that. So that's just some work that the team here at ITS has done. And I don't know, Robbie, you've been monitoring the chat. Is there anything urgent in there or anything we haven't covered, or should we just get on to the kind of close out of the slides here?
No questions up front. If anybody
Not
wants
a
to fill-
problem. Not a problem. All right, so look, just want to tell people like what resources we have and ServiceNow has to help make this process maybe not easier, but manageable and real world experience. Jay mentioned we got the ready for Service Graph connector tool in the ServiceNow store. What's the real name of it
The
again?
real name is the Service Graph Connector Readiness Tool. Yeah.
All right. I go around, I do a lot of general OT workshops to help people understand. There's a lot of FUD around OT, and there's a lot of FUD around, I mean, there's a reason that most of the customers that we see who have a significant ServiceNow deployment are putting this data in the CMDB. It's not, I mean, there is a use case, unified system of record, the context that you can get inside, unified system of action and the benefits you can get. It's a pretty good value statement. We have our prescriptive OT offerings that we can talk through to help people really understand, hey, this is what you're facing in this part of the roadmap. We do road mapping sessions too. That's not on this. And then Robbie, you do a lot of product demos as well, right?
Quite a bit, quite a bit. Happy to tailor a demo for anyone on the call.
It is, and understanding the products is important. But I guess as we look at the pilot thing and wrap up here, the pilot really, it's about the technology for sure, but it's really about the process and the people if it's really going to be a valuable one. So I've also included Robbie's phone number, direct phone number, and email, and mine as well. So if you have any questions, or in addition to these offerings, you just want to talk about what's going on and ask some questions, that's something we do every day, and actually we enjoy talking about
Absolutely.
it. So I also want to thank everybody on the panel for the energy you put into having this discussion, not just today but every day. And I think with that we can close our session.